The mountains had always called to me, but never like this trip. I had been driving alone for nearly 6 hours through a remote section of the northern ranges, the kind of place where the air smelled like cold stone and the roads twisted sharply along cliff edges that had no guardrails. People warned me not to travel this route after sunset. They said storms formed without warning, that radio signals died, and sometimes travelers simply vanished. But I had brushed it off. I needed to reach a research outpost the next morning, and the shortcut through the dark peaks was the fastest way. I wish I had listened. By the time the sun slipped behind the serrated line of mountains, a heavy gloom spread over the road. My headlights pushed through the forming fog, revealing only a few meters ahead. Temperature dropped sharply. My fingers tingled when I gripped the steering wheel. It felt less like cold and more like electricity humming through the air. The map said this stretch of highway was straight for another 50 miles before the first town. But with the thick fog rolling in like a living thing, every mile felt longer and lonelier than the last. The first unsettling moment came when I saw something on the side of the road, something small, hunched, unmoving. As I passed, the shape turned its head. It wasn't an animal. It looked like a child, pale-faced, with hair dripping as if wet from rain that wasn't falling. The child stared directly into my window as I drove past. My heart stuttered violently. When I pressed the brake to slow down, the child was gone. There was nowhere he could have run, not in that instant. My breathing turned shallow. I kept driving. Minutes later, my radio began picking up static. Not ordinary static. The sound was rhythmic, like slow breathing. I lowered the volume, but the static grew louder on its own, rising into a whisper. At first, it sounded like the wind pushing through wires. But then it formed words. Don't stop. I yanked the plug from the radio. The whispering continued for a few seconds even after it was disconnected. I swallowed hard. I wasn't the type to scare easily. But a sinking heaviness had settled into my chest. The fog thickened so much I felt like I was driving through cotton. The cliffs beside me turned into vague shadows. I kept checking my mirrors, even though I knew nothing was behind me. That's when I noticed the figure. At the edge of my headlights, maybe 50 meters ahead, someone stood in the middle of the road. I slammed the brakes. Tires screeched across the icy asphalt. I gripped the wheel so tightly my hands hurt. The figure didn't move. A person, no, a woman. Tall, thin, long black hair whipping in the wind. Her head was tilted at an unnatural angle, as though her neck couldn't hold its weight. I blinked once. She disappeared. My stomach dropped. I shifted into drive to speed away, but before I even touched the gas, something tapped my window. I froze. Slowly, I turned my head. A face pressed against the glass. A woman's face, ashen, sunken eyes, lips cracked like dried earth. Her eyes were clouded but fixed directly on me. I screamed and floored the gas pedal. My car shot forward, the fog parting briefly before swallowing me again. My heart hammered so hard it hurt. I kept telling myself it was fear, fatigue, the darkness playing tricks. But deep down, I knew the mountains were not empty. Lights flickered inside the car. The dashboard dimmed. My headlights pulsed like a heartbeat. Then everything went just a shade darker, as though a shadow had passed over the entire vehicle. Suddenly, my car jerked violently, as if I had hit something. I wrestled the wheel to stay on the road. When I looked in the mirror, expecting to see an animal or debris, all I saw was a figure sprinting behind me on all fours, unnaturally fast, impossibly close. My hands trembled. I hit 90 on the straight stretch, but the figure didn't slow. It moved like a blur of limbs and hair, its head twisted toward me with that same too wide, cracked smile. The moment I crossed a bend, it vanished again. My car began losing power. The engine sputtered. The lights dimmed further. Every instinct told me I needed to get off this mountain road before the car died completely. I scanned for any sign of shelter, a motel, even an abandoned cabin, anything. That's when I saw the tunnel. A long, old stone tunnel carved into the mountain, unlit and foreboding. But if the car died in the open, I'd be trapped with whatever was out there. So, I steered into the tunnel. The moment I entered, all signals vanished. Radio, phone, GPS. The engine coughed again. The tunnel stretched further than it should have. I drove deeper, hoping it would open on the other side, but the darkness inside felt alive. It pressed against the car like a giant hand. A shadow moved on the tunnel wall. Then another. Then dozens. But the tunnel was empty. Completely empty. My vision blurred. I blinked hard. That's when the shadows slowly peeled off the walls. They crawled down like dripping ink, forming skeletal outlines of figures, men, women, children, each with sunken faces and hollow eyes. They lined the tunnel walls on both sides, staring at my car unmoving. My breath came out in a shaky sob. The engine sputtered one last time and died. The silence was suffocating. I sat there in the pitch black, gripping the wheel, unable to breathe. My own heartbeat echoed through the car. I tried to start the car again. The key turned, but nothing happened. Then, one of the shadow figures moved. It stepped forward. Then another. Soon, all of them turned their heads toward me. A whisper echoed throughout the tunnel, thousands of voices overlapping. You should not have come. My entire body turned to ice. I locked the doors instinctively, even though I knew locks couldn't stop whatever these things were. The shadows approached the car slowly, deliberately, as though savoring the moment. They pressed their hands against the windows. Cold seeped through the glass. My breath fogged. Then I heard breathing inside the back seat. A slow, heavy. I didn't want to look, but I turned my head, trembling so violently my teeth chattered. The woman with the twisted neck sat in the back seat, inches behind me. Her eyes rolled toward me. Her mouth opened slowly, impossibly wide, more crack than a human expression. You brought them, I screamed, slammed my hand on the horn, and the echoes exploded through the tunnel. The shadows recoiled. The woman hissed, covering her ears. My car lights flickered violently, then surged bright white for a brief second. The engine roared to life. I didn't question it. I floored the gas, speeding through the tunnel. The woman lunged forward, but dissolved into smoke before she could reach me. Shadows scraped against the windows, leaving long black streaks. I didn't blink, didn't breathe, just drove. Finally, I burst out of the tunnel into freezing night air. But the road ahead wasn't the same. It sloped downward sharply, as though I was no longer in the same section of the mountains. The fog had cleared, and stars flickered above. I drove until I reached the first small town, an old mining settlement that barely showed up on maps. When I parked outside a gas station, an elderly man stepped out, wiping his hands on his coat. You look like you saw a ghost, he said, concerned. I shook my head, unable to explain. He studied my car. You came through the mountain tunnel, didn't you? I hesitated. Yes. He sighed deeply, eyes darkening. That tunnel's been closed since 1972. Landslide buried it. Nobody can drive through it. I felt all warmth drain from my body. Impossible, I whispered. I just did. The old man shook his head. People who go missing on that road, some say their souls wander those peaks, that they don't like being disturbed. I remembered the woman's face. I remembered the whisper. Don't stop. For the rest of the night, I stayed in this small-town motel, unable to sleep. At dawn, I inspected my car. The black streak marks from the shadows were still there, cold to the touch. The authorities never believed my story, and no one else saw the tunnel entrance when we went back. The cliffside looked untouched, as though nothing had ever existed there. I left the mountains with a new understanding, one I never wanted. Some places do not belong to the living, and the dark peaks are one of them.